He wasn't the type to attend bridal showers, not because he wasn't supportive or interested. He simply had never been invited to one. And if he were being honest, he had never expected to be. But there it was, a soft pink envelope waiting on his kitchen counter one rainy Thursday morning. No return address, just his name, written in a familiar cursive that brought back laughter-filled nights in the scent of lavender shampoo from a dorm room a decade ago. Inside, the card was floral and delicate. It read, "You're invited to Camille's bridal shower. Your presence would mean the world." Luca stared at it, unmoving. Camille, a name he hadn't said out loud in months, a name that used to come with a reflexive smile, until life, distance, and silence turned it into something more complicated. She had moved away 5 years ago, found a new city, a new circle, and eventually, a new fiancé. Their calls grew shorter, their check-ins less frequent. Yet here she was asking him to be part of something deeply personal. At first, he laughed softly, unsure if it was a mistake. But the laughter didn't last long. He was the only man invited. That became clear the moment he arrived. The venue was a beautiful rooftop restaurant dressed in soft pastels and white roses. The guests, all women, turned toward him with polite surprise as he walked in tall, composed, out of place. There were hugs, awkward smiles, and whispers. But Camille smiled wide, pulled him in, and said, "I knew you'd come." He tried to relax. He reminded himself that this was her day, not his. That maybe, just maybe, this was her way of reconnecting, of saying, "You're still part of my life." But even that thought didn't shake the discomfort completely. There were glances he couldn't ignore, questions he imagined in their eyes. Why him? Why now still? He stayed for Camille, or for the years they had been family when both of them had none. When her spare mattress was his only home after being kicked out for loving who he loved. When he held her as she cried through her second heartbreak, and she held him through his first. And yet, no shared history could have prepared him for what he stumbled upon when he stepped outside for air. The rooftop's side terrace was quiet. A gentle breeze carried laughter from inside. Luca leaned against the railing, closing his eyes. That was when he heard the voice, low, shaky, almost trembling. "I miss you too. But you know I can't come to the wedding." Luca's body stiffened. The voice belonged to a man, a voice that wasn't trying to whisper, but wasn't brave enough to be heard. And then the name slipped out. Soft, intimate, Antoine. He didn't move. He didn't need to. His chest was already tight with realization. Antoine was the groom, Camille's groom. Luca stood frozen, not daring to turn around, afraid that what he suspected might already be true. And deep inside, he knew it wasn't the strangeness of the invitation that brought him here. It was something else. Something about unfinished stories that refused to stay buried. Something about the truth, how it always waits for the right moment to walk into a party uninvited. Have you ever been in a room where everyone is smiling except your gut? If this moment made you pause, you might want to stay, because what Luca uncovers next changes everything. Don't forget to follow this story. The next chapter is the part no one at that party saw coming. Luca didn't turn around. He couldn't. Not because he didn't want to confirm what he had just heard, but because some truths don't need visual proof to hurt. His hands tightened around the rim of the glass he had carried outside. A quiet bitterness coated the back of his throat, heavier than the champagne. Behind him, footsteps shifted. The call had ended. There was no laughter, no remorse, just silence. Then the soft creak of the terrace door closing. Whoever it was, he had walked away like nothing had happened. Luca exhaled slowly, blinking against the breeze. There was something cruel in the contrast, the city skyline, the golden hour light warming the balcony tiles, the pink streamers dancing from the rooftop garden, and this. The voice that cracked on the word wedding wasn't just a stranger's. It wasn't just a groom slipping up. It was layered with emotion, familiarity, and that single whispered name, Antoine, carried a weight that only intimacy could explain. Still stunned, Luca returned inside, letting the din of laughter and brunch clatter drown out his thoughts. He found a quiet corner, close enough to observe but far from conversation. That's when he saw him, Julian, tray in hand, dressed in the waitstaff's black uniform, walking between tables with the same grace he used to walk beside Luca in the park. It took less than a second to recognize him. The curve of his jaw, the flick of his fingers as he adjusted his collar, the way he half smiled without showing teeth. Julian hadn't changed, at least not in the ways that mattered. But he hadn't spoken to Luca in years. No message, no explanation. One day, they had brunch plans. The next, he was gone. And now he was here, serving at the bridal shower of Camille, Luca's old friend, fiancé to Antoine. Antoine, who had just whispered love into a phone he wasn't supposed to use. It was too much for Luca's mind to hold all at once. He waited, he watched. And when Julian slipped toward the kitchen with an empty tray, Luca followed. The staff hallway smelled like citrus cleaner and wilted roses. The noise of the party softened behind layers of painted drywall. Luca didn't announce himself. He just stood at the kitchen door, watching Julian place the tray on a metal shelf, run a hand through his hair, and exhale the kind of breath you release when no one's supposed to be watching. But someone was. Julian turned and froze. His lips parted, but no sound came. Luca stepped forward. He didn't speak right away. There was no script for this moment, no right way to ask why someone you loved vanished only to reappear like this. On the arm, or perhaps under the arm of someone else's fiancé. Julian's voice came first. "I didn't think you'd be here." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even guilt. It was the kind of honesty that burns because it's real. Luca stared at him. Neither did I. They stood like that, locked in a silence stitched together by too many questions and too little courage. It was Julian who broke it again, softer now. "I'm just working, that's all." But his eyes gave him away. They shifted, not with discomfort, but with the weight of a secret that had grown too big for his chest. Before Luca could reply, a familiar voice echoed behind him. "Everything all right?" It was Marion, the maid of honor, Camille's best friend since college, and once Luca's too. She looked from him to Julian, then back again, and something in her expression told Luca everything he needed to know. She knew, not just about Julian, but about Antoine, about all of it, and she had said nothing, not to Camille, not to Luca, not even in a look, a hesitation, a hint of disapproval, just silence. Luca's jaw tightened. His eyes met Marion's, waiting for her to blink, to explain, to say even one word, but she didn't. She only looked away. That silence hurt more than the phone call, because betrayal whispered behind your back is one thing, but silence from a friend, that's a choice. Luca walked out of the kitchen slower than he had entered, not because he was unsure of his steps, but because he carried something heavier now. He had arrived with curiosity, maybe even a spark of nostalgia, but what he held now was weight. Weight with names. Antoine, Julian, Marion. Each name stitched into a secret Camille was never meant to see. Back at the table, the bridal shower continued without disturbance. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed between bouquets. Guests scribbled advice on pastel note cards and pinned them to a board labeled "Words of Wisdom for the Bride." Luca sat in silence, watching Camille from afar as she opened a small box wrapped in lilac paper. Her smile was one, full, oblivious. It was unbearable, because now he didn't just know the truth, he knew who was choosing to hide it. He replayed Marion's silence in his head. It wasn't fear, it wasn't indecision, it was complicity. There's something particularly cruel about betrayal from someone who once held your trust. Camille may not have known what was happening around her, but Marion did. She knew, and she smiled anyway. Organized the brunch, chose the napkins, toasted to a future she knew was already crumbling. Luca looked down at the half-finished mimosa in front of him. The bubbles had long gone flat. He wondered how long this lie had been floating beneath the surface. How many people had seen Julian sneaking out the side entrance? How many had stayed quiet, like Marion, thinking silence was safer than truth? That's when it hit him. This wasn't just about Camille anymore. It was about every person who had ever stood in a room full of celebration while carrying a truth that would shatter it. About every man who swallowed discomfort to avoid being that guy, the one who ruins the party by saying what no one wants to hear. The one who chooses integrity over acceptance. And Luca had been that man before. Years ago, in a different city, at a different dinner table. He had told his parents about Julian. That moment had cost him the roof over his head, but he had slept better on Camille's floor than he ever had in his childhood bed, because the truth, once spoken, had made space for breath again. But this time wasn't about him. It was about her. And maybe that's what made it even harder. Because when someone you care about is walking toward disaster with a smile on their face, the worst thing you can do is pretend not to see the edge. Camille laughed again, tossing her hair back, reading aloud a note card that advised her to always kiss before bed. Luca blinked. He had to do something, but not here. Not now. Not in front of 70 guests. Not with photos being taken. Not with fake flower petals raining from the ceiling vents. He stood and quietly made his way to the coat rack. The breeze outside had cooled. The sky had faded into soft gold, the kind of light that made even hard decisions look beautiful for a moment. He sat in his car for a long time before unlocking his phone. The email he wrote wasn't poetic. It wasn't cruel either. It was precise and calm and anchored in love, not bitterness. He attached the photo from the terrace. He described the moment, the voice, the hesitation in Julian's eyes, the silence in Marion's. He ended the message with one line: "You once told me that the worst kind of lie is the one you tell yourself. I think you deserve better than that." And then he pressed send. Luca sat in silence for a while. The city hummed outside his window. There was no instant reply, no explosion, no reward, only quiet. But this quiet was different from Marion's. This was the quiet that comes after choosing what's right, even when it costs you something. This was the kind of quiet that lets you breathe again. Camille didn't respond immediately. Hours passed, then an entire day. Luca tried not to check his phone too often, but each vibration set his pulse racing. He knew better than to expect a reply right away. He also knew silence could mean anything: shock, anger, denial, or worst of all, disbelief. But this wasn't the kind of truth you could ignore forever. The next morning, as sunlight crept through the blinds, his phone lit up. One new message. From her. It was short. "Thank you for being brave when I wasn't. I need time." Luca sat still for a long time, reading those words over and over. They weren't explosive. They weren't accusatory. But in them was a tremble. He could feel it through the screen. He thought back to the Camille he once knew, the woman who stood beside him when his world collapsed, who gave him space on her floor and a bowl of cereal when he had nothing else. That woman had always valued honesty, even when it was sharp. But she had also always wanted love. And maybe this version of her, engaged, exhausted, deeply invested in an image she had built, had found herself caught between those two values. Still, she had heard him. That was enough. The next days passed slowly, wrapped in uncertainty. Luca returned to his work, tried to focus, but his mind wandered. Not just to Camille, but to Julian, to Antoine, to Marion, whose silence still echoed louder than words. Then, on the fourth day, it happened. The headlines came first. The wedding was canceled. Quietly, without public drama, without a statement, but clearly. The venue's booking was withdrawn. Florists were notified. RSVPs marked no longer required. There were whispers, 2 tiny digital footprints, a photo of Camille at the airport, suitcase in hand, A story from a bridesmaid's Instagram that disappeared within an hour. Luca didn't need details. He understood. Camille had chosen to start over alone, and then a letter came, not digital, not typed. A real letter. Handwritten, postmarked from a coastal town a few hours away. Inside was a card, unadorned. Her handwriting was as familiar as ever. Luca, I'm sitting on a beach where no one knows me, and I'm finally breathing again. I thought love meant holding everything together, even when the pieces didn't fit. You reminded me that real love, any kind, is never built on silence. I don't know how to thank you without making it sound transactional, so I'll just say this. You weren't the only man at my bridal shower. You were the only one who showed up with truth. Luca closed the letter, his throat thick. There was no closure in the traditional sense, no justice, no confrontation. Antoine vanished from Camille's life as quietly as he had once entered it. Julian, too, disappeared, whether out of shame or self-preservation. Luca didn't know, and Marion, she never reached out. But maybe that was the nature of truth. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't chase down apologies or tidy up what's broken. It just offers a way forward, a different road, and those who are ready will take it. Luca folded the letter and placed it in a box where he kept things that mattered. Photos, postcards, handwritten notes, reminders not just of people, but of moments where he chose to live honestly, even when it hurt. He knew Camille would be okay, maybe not immediately, but eventually, because she had done what many couldn't. She listened, and then she acted for herself. The wedding was supposed to be in spring. Camille had chosen tulips, soft ivory, and dusky pinks. She had once told Luca she imagined walking barefoot down a grassy aisle, the breeze behind her, the world finally still. But spring came and went, and the grassy aisle remained empty. No chairs were arranged. No music played. Instead, somewhere in a town along the coast, Camille was building a quieter life, one not tied to false promises or tangled truths. Luca didn't hear from her again after the letter. He didn't need to. There was something sacred about knowing when a chapter had closed gently, without slamming. Some friendships don't need daily messages to remain whole. Some wounds don't require words to begin healing. Still, something lingered. The aftermath, not of what had happened, but of what hadn't. There was no apology from Marion, no explanation. Her silence remained a presence all its own, more cutting than confrontation ever could be. Luca thought of writing to her once, not in anger, just to ask why. Why had she said nothing? Why had she let Camille step into a future she knew was built on borrowed time? But then he realized, maybe the silence was her answer. Some people protect comfort more fiercely than they protect others. Julian faded too. No posts, no messages. Luca once searched for his name online, not out of longing, but out of curiosity. He wanted to know if Julian had found peace, or if he was still circling others' lives like a ghost, never staying long enough to be real. As for Antoine, Luca only knew what Camille had written. He didn't fight me, and perhaps that said it all. So life moved on. Luca began painting again, something he hadn't done in years. He started going for morning walks before work, reclaiming the silence as something sacred, not haunting. He reconnected with friends, not because he needed distraction, but because he realized how deeply we need each other to stay honest, grounded, seen. One afternoon, while rearranging a box of old letters, Luca pulled out Camille's note again. He hadn't read it in weeks, but this time he noticed something he hadn't before. A small second card tucked behind the folded paper. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed, cream-colored, simple font. It read, "To the one who spoke when others stayed silent, thank you for giving me back my voice." No signature, no date, just a gesture. Small, quiet, but unforgettable. Luca placed it beside a photograph of them from college arms around each other, smiling without makeup or masks, a time when truth had been easier, because the world hadn't yet taught them how hard it could be. He sat down by the window and watched the sun roll gently over the city, unbothered and bright. There were still bridal showers happening somewhere. Still people raising glasses to futures not yet known. Still secrets being kept. Still truths waiting to be told. But for Luca, for now, there was peace, not the kind born of resolution, but the kind that blooms when you choose to live honestly in a world that often rewards the opposite. And that, he knew, was enough. Have you ever told someone the truth not to hurt them, but because you respected them too much to lie? Leave your answer in the comments. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if this journey meant something to you, don't forget to follow us for more stories that remind you your voice matters, even when it shakes.